We're going to get started on the Portland Planning Sustainability Commission meeting of August 26th. Our agenda tonight is called order of items of interest from the commissioners. And then we have a hearing, which is Winning Way, Jack Ramsey Way, street renaming. Because it's a hearing, if you wish to testify, please fill out a form in the back and give it to Julie, and we'll call your name. You'll get 3 minutes, and we will make a decision. And then at 6:45 or approximately, or before that, we will have Recap 7 work plan. And again, that's a hearing. And so if you wish to testify on the Recap 7, please fill out a form in the back and give it to Julie. Please distinguish whether you're testifying for the street renaming or the recap. And so we can call you up. And after the Recap 7 hearing and decision, we have climate preparation strategy and climate action plan, and we'll be done. That is a briefing. And today also we'll have some honored guests that I'll introduce before the climate preparation and strategy. Items of interest from commissioners. Karen?
So the item I have is that on September 9th at 6:30 at Park Rose High School, Mount Hood Community College is doing its community conversations around their facilities, as I believe that they're going out for a capital construction bond. So they're doing a number of community strategic meetings. If anybody's interested, come by and have a cookie.
Other items? I have just one. Last Friday, I attended a outreach that BPS put on for underserved communities, for many of the immigrant communities in East Portland. And I will say it was a kind of moving because one of their statement to BPS staff and me was that they really welcomed BPS making a effort to involve their communities in this thing they called democracy. And this is what they moved here for. They wanted the prosperity, the involvement in democracy. And they're happy, they're involved. But they made the point that they do democracy a little bit differently. They're not place-based, they're cultural-based. So they're not a neighborhood association, they're a culture. And so I encourage them to participate because we will have a hearing in the region and talk about, we have a place in the comp plan to talk about public involvement and how we might incorporate that culture involvement as a policy relative to a place-based policy of a public involvement. Yes, Howard.
I just want to comment on that, if I may. That's a very important and sensitive issue around planning for the city, around whether communities are cultural or they're, And it brings to mind, my question is to whether ONI, the Office of Neighborhood Associations, that actually puts together neighborhoods, is not looking into this other kind of cultural gathering to make sure they're represented. We're hearing a recap hearing today about some minor adjustments that are, to most people, nothing, but to some people, very important and effective. And this certainly will impact over time the immigrant communities, and that's a plural. I mean, if you went, talk to Russian, Indonesian, everything under the sun, and not in small numbers, in my view, demographically. So I think we have to take, again, back to the Portland plan, back to equity, that there's something within a neighborhood that's another kind of cultural voice that really, I believe, should be heard in our planning and in our recommendations to council, that it isn't so cut and dried by boundary lines and by neighborhood association requirements. And I'm sure Oni's ready to kill me for saying this, but I think that's a job for them. I do think that it's important that they get into it. Thank you, sir.
No, I agree with you, and I think our job through the comp plan is to try to figure out how to do that effectively, for the long term. Yes.
I'd like to speak on that as well. So I just had a meeting actually at the Native American Youth and Family Center with Matt Morton, Donita Fry, and Ray Espana. And I was really, being new to the Christian, I was really curious as how I should be coming in and looking at all of these documents I'm being, that are being thrown at me. And I think it comes down to, again, part of what was reiterated was, yeah, it is cultural based as well, because the Native community is spread out through so many different neighborhoods. And another really important piece, a number of important pieces, but another important piece is the fact that the consultation and public involvement likely falls short of what it needs to be. It needs to be more than a comprehensive plan draft being shown to stakeholders after it's drafted, or only some of the comments incorporated, but instead needs to be a partnership side by side with these organizations and these communities, and it needs to be a back and forth. And it can't just, and there needs to be adequate funding to ensure that it is, that we do follow through on equity, on our goals and our language of equity, because without the funding and the money behind it, it's just language. So I think we really need to, when we look through all of these plans and documents, it's really important for us to look at what point were they consulted, or communities, at what point are communities consulted, as well as how are we going to create actionable goals, and how are these going to be implemented? So actually thinking about whether it's feasible.
Thank you. Other comments? Joe?
Yes, three things. One is for West Quadrant, Central City Plan. We have a hearing on September 9th, and just a reminder, if any commissioners have any sort of questions or comments about West Quadrant Plan, it's be great to be getting them into staff, and you can send them through Julie. We're preparing for a work session on that plan for October 21st, so we'll take also what we get from the hearing, and hopefully we'll have enough time on the 9th to at least hit some highlights to have everybody recap so that we know how to structure and brief you all for your work session on the 21st. Second, we have confirmed the locations for the October comprehensive plan hearings in the community. And on October 14th, we'll be at the beautiful Park Rose High School.
Yeah.
And on October 28th, we'll be at Portland Community College Southeast location at 82nd Division. Okay? And I think we'll be, of course, sending you all reminders about those meetings and locations, and they both of those meetings start at 5 and are scheduled for 4 hours. The last thing is we have, I think probably as Susan has already let you know, we established a call center to be able to respond to the calls and we've been getting around the comprehensive plan. And last week, I believe it was, we sent out a mass mailing to folks to give them a heads up that there's something in the comprehensive plan that may affect their properties. And so far we've gotten, from that mailing at least, over 700 calls into the call center. Since we opened the call center in July, we've gotten almost 1,000 calls. And 95% of those calls have been responded to so far, so we got behind for a little bit, so our desired 24-hour turnaround for the calls didn't happen, but we've caught up, and we get about 20 a day right now. Most of these calls, they run the full gamut. Most of them are taking about 5 to 15 minutes, so some are preponderance or simple questions, what's this even really mean? And then some are dealing into more specific details. And if there's a real complicated issue, we refer it to one of the district planners who can follow up and really dig in with folks. That's it.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, a couple follow-ups to Margaret's points. Were you here when Deborah Stein did the presentation on outreach on the comp plan? I don't.
No, she was yet.
I don't
I
think
don't think
so.
she was, no.
I was really impressed with what they're doing. I think it would behoove you to talk directly to Deborah and have a conversation about their outreach, because they're doing some pretty amazing stuff, but there may be other ways from the cultural perspective or whatever. The second one is I'm really pleased to hear we're doing a work session following the 9th meeting, because to me, I have some major issues or concerns with the West Quadrant Plan, and it just seemed pretty hard to believe that we would come to a resolution on the 9th without some opportunity for some conversation. So I'm pleased to hear that.
And just as a reminder, if people had questions, have you sent your questions in to Julie and for the West Quadrant? If you had questions, I know Chris, I've got your mic.
They're coming.
I've sent some in. Anybody else? Okay, I would encourage you to get those in so staff can get working on them, get answers. And Joe, just a question. We have 4 hearings on the comp plan, correct? And the 2 that you discussed are the 2 in the community, and then we have 2 more, correct? That
2
will be
here, right.
Correct.
And, you know, they're billed as hearings on specific parts of the comprehensive plan, but I think especially if we're out in the community holding a hearing, we're going to hear about anything people want to talk about, which is perfectly fine. And we were talking today about how the whole public outreach process will work once we're into the work sessions too. So we're going to go through this several months of hearings, a couple of months of hearings, and out of that, it will, just like I was saying for West Quadrant Plan, there's going to be a list of issues that you pick up from that testimony or that you've got from your own reading, and we're going to structure our work sessions to sort of work through them as we can. And we may find that, like we did with the Portland plan, if you remember, some of those times when we knew we were going to tackle a specific issue, you invited certain people to come and be part of the panel because you heard them at the public testimony or you knew. So we can structure it that way to keep dialogue going even when you're in work session. And it's going to take as long as it takes.
Okay. Karen was first. Go ahead.
I had a question, Joe, on your call center and in the mailings. I received several of the mailings for the properties that I own. Are any of the mailings in multiple languages and the call centers have translators?
Yes, the call centers have for sure translators, and the way the mailing worked is I think on the mailing it had in a variety of languages sort of instructions for, you know, to direct you to the call center, because at the call center we can hook you up with translation services. And so far of those calls, of those almost 1,000 that we've gotten, 12 of them have utilized the translation, the interpretation services we've got hooked into the call center.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
Well, that leads to my next question. We're meeting in Parkrose High School and 82nd Division, which are geographically very suited to immigrant populations you just talked about.
Yeah.
Outreach to those communities to encourage them to be at these hearings is really a wonderful opportunity.
You know, and I'll follow up with Deborah. I believe that's part of the plan. You know, we're working with the Office of Neighborhood Involvement and it's the Office of Equity and Human Rights and the program they've set up with interpreters in the culturally specific communities. So I know that Deborah's working on both outreach and follow-up directly to those groups using the Polos Catalanis program that he set up.
Yeah, I would just reemphasize what Joe said at that on Friday. Marty was very specific about making sure that the immigrant communities were notified, not only notified, but involved and invited. And so I didn't go into the full plan because they were there for a different purpose. But
Just a great geographic location.
it is. It is.
work.
Perfect. Any other comments? Nope. We'll go to the first item, Winning Way, Ramsey Way Street renaming. This is a hearing. If people have testimony, please fill out a testimonial card, give it to Julie, and note that you're testifying for Winning Way. Kurt?
Good evening, Planning and Sustainability Commissioners. My name is Kurt Kruger with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and by day my job is a development review manager. By night, I guess I take on street renamings every once in a while. It's been about 5 years. I'm excited to be here tonight. So far, this one has been a little less controversial than the last one. I think there are 2 faces here tonight that were part of the last process, so I can go into as much detail or as little detail as you want, but this can be a rather brief presentation. As you're probably aware, Dr. Jeff Ramsey passed away earlier this year. Former Blazers coach, made a significant impact to sports fans around the city of Portland. To honor him, the Blazers and Commissioner Novick and Brian Hockaday from Commissioner Novick's office is in the audience tonight, decided to honor him by renaming a street within the city of Portland. So they filed an application to rename the street a few months ago. That street proposed to be renamed was North Winning Way. And for those familiar with the Rose Garden area, it's a 4-block section. That street is surrounded by property owned by the city of Portland, which is fairly significant in this renaming application. The last renaming application had a lot of residents proposed, businesses that might have been affected. This is purely owned by the city of Portland, the Rose Garden Arena. There were a couple nuances that did not meet city code, and we wanted to make sure we got in front of that, highlight that transparently. First and foremost, the code asked for the person to be considered to be renaming to have been deceased for 5 years, and that was not the case as he just recently passed away. So the city council passed a resolution earlier this year recognizing that that criteria was not met, and city council was okay with that not being met. In addition, the auditor's office is required to send out a mailing to property owners notifying them of all the hearings that would be required before the renaming would go into effect. And because the city of Portland are the only property owners, we've decided to forego that mailing requirement and sent an email to the city's staff associated with those properties. So the council passed that resolution. Commissioner Novick nominated a historian panel per code to weigh in on this. The historian panel met about 6 weeks ago, formed a letter of recommendation and support. I think that's in your packet tonight. And the next step in the process is to come before the Planning and Sustainability Commission to have a hearing. And ultimately, your job is to consider forwarding a recommendation of support or not to the City Council. So with that said, I can end there. If there's more questions that are asked, part of the code asks that we provide a budget impact statement, which was also included. There's about 13 signs. I think our estimated cost was around $2,100 or so for those replacements.
Okay. Thank you. Questions before we go to testimony? Okay. Is there any testimony on Julie? Okay, the hearing is closed. Other questions?
Well, I guess I'm old enough to remember not only Jack Ramsey, but what Jack Ramsey brought to Portland. And it is reminiscent, if you're kind of a sports person, around what LeBron James has done in Cleveland, where a sports figure, or in our case in 76, 77, a team igniting the city in some kind of a community way that I've not seen since. That Blazer Mania number was really true in 76, 70, 75, 76, and Jack Ramsey had everything to do with it. He was a very classy guy, and so a personal experience, I met him when he and Bill Walton were shooting hoops at Chapman, up at next to Chapman School, the park.
Wallace Park.
Wallace Park, yeah.
They ruined it for the rest of us.
It was hard to be around a big, tall, redheaded guy. It really was. So I enthusiastically, if I may, move this resolution and pass it along to the council with a lot of appreciation and support for a person who, as the resolution says, was a classy guy, brought a classy act to Portland, people that stayed out of jail and did wonderful things for the team. And I'm proud to make that recommendation and move the resolution.
Second. Any other discussion? Julie?
Ray?
Aye.
Kyle?
I moved into Bill Walton's old apartment that Sports Illustrated described as a rundown apartment in Northwest Portland. People would drive by for months afterwards, and they'd point up, and I'd be in the window, and they'd look. Who the hell is that? Aye.
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 Afraid of what Howard would do to me if I voted no.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes. Motion passes.
That was the
We'll
toughest
get
one
a-
you've ever had, Kurt.
You'll get a letter of recommendation that we can,
We have drafted one, should be ready for you by tomorrow.
okay, great. Next is a hearing, recap 7 work plan. Again, if you wish to testify, please fill out a card and provide it to Julie, and we'll call you. Testimony will be 3 minutes.
Procedural question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So we advertised this on the agenda at 6:45, so will we be taking testimony up until 6:45 in case anybody comes in right then?
You know, Julie and I were just talking about that too. We could either wait, or we just have to make sure that the hearing is still
Hearing's
open at
open.
6:45, and that there's opportunity for people to testify, because they're going to come at that time. And we know that there's people coming to testify, so if you would like, we could wait for 20 minutes, or we could proceed.
Why don't we take about a 5-minute break? How long will Morgan, how long will your presentation take? Okay, so why don't we take a 5-minute break and then come back, and then the hearing will be open at that time.